time being, and let's talk about Nelson Piquet. Something else I would say on this podcast. I'm talking about the world's most exciting man, Nelson Piquet Jr. But he was going to race for Carlin in the. I think it was the Pau Grand Prix, King.
Yes, it was the Pau Grand Prix, a round of the Formula 3 European Championship.
Yeah, Nelson Piquet had every intention of taking part, which was, nice to see and whatnot. Very cool that Nelson Piquet, obviously an experienced journeyman, obviously Formula E champion and, established driver, was going out there to, nice little boost for the European Formula 3 series. Until the FIA blocked his re-entry, King. Did the FIA give a specific reason as to why?
Their specific wording was against the spirit of the championship, because this year they introduced a lot of rules to limit driver eligibility. The two main ones were that you had to have a year of car racing under your belt before you could enter the championship, and you could have no more than 3 seasons in the championship in terms of experience. Nelson Piquet successfully, he was eligible to compete, but in the spirit of the rules, he wasn't eligible.
Yeah, it's like that's the impression I first got when this story first came out, that it was more a violation of the spirit of the rules more than the actual rule itself. That, there's no reason why Nelson couldn't take part, but we all know what the FIA Formula 3 Championship is. We all know it's a feeder series. We all know it's part of the FIA's master plan to essentially have their own ladder to get to Formula 1 eventually, and I can see the argument that people would make as to why they wouldn't want Nelson to race. I can see it. I understand it in the sense of, like Nelson being as good as he is might cost other people points who are competing for the championship. I mean, Adam, what's your take on all this? Because I feel like I could see both sides of the argument here. I'm not entirely sure which one I agree with more in terms of whether he should be allowed to take part, or whether it goes against what the series is all about, really, by him having this one-off Grand Prix. How do you feel about it, Adam?
I think it's difficult. I call it the Cup Drivers in Xfinity Series problem. This is the thing that NASCAR has been struggling with for ages and ages, and I don't make this comparison superfluously, because the problem over in NASCAR in the Xfinity Series in the second tier is that Sprint Cup drivers start almost every single race over there, and quite often win almost every single race because of their superior experience, equipment, talent, blah blah blah. So it's almost gone too far the other way over there, in that it's the whole point of a second tier development series is being run roughshod by these Cup guys, having a bit of fun on a Saturday and kind of seemingly ruin it for everyone else. Although I've spoken to several drivers in those lower divisions who actually enjoy it when a big time guy comes down to their series, because if you beat those guys, that's a big marker of what you can do. Cool. So in this case, coming back to this example, I feel like it's probably excessive, because Piquet was only going to appear seemingly for this one race. Mm-hmm. He wanted to guest in that, and if it extends towards the Macau Grand Prix, one that is almost built on its big name wildcards at this point, I think, to be honest with you, that kind of ruins a lot of the fun of the motorsport at this point, especially in a motorsport world where we don't see as many out-of-series cameos from drivers anymore. It's almost unusual when guys, go and compete in multiple different series. I mean, Matthias Ekstrom managed to pull a double-header of a very different variety recently at Hockenheim, when he ran the DTM races there and the World Rallycross round there on the same weekend. They had a sort of joint weekend. So that was unusual in itself. But back in the 50s and 60s, I mean, guys were jumping in different kinds of race car every single week, weren't they? Guys like Jim Clark, Graham Hill, Dan Gurney, AJ Foyt, all these guys they drive NASCAR one week, they drive IndyCar the another week, British touring cars the next week. Oh, maybe I'll do some Formula 1. Oh, you know what? I might give Formula 2 a go this week. I'm not doing anything this weekend. Let's have some Formula 3 or some 5,000 or so. That's just how it was. We don't really get that as much anymore for, in some cases, for many understandable reasons, but I feel like this would have been a neat example. It would have been a little bit of exhibition. It would have been a showcase for the event. It's got people talking about the event in the end for the wrong reasons. And I just think the saddest visual of the whole thing was the image that I think it was Carlin, it must have been the team that were going to run the car. They tweeted out on Saturday morning of just a sad face and just a picture of the car sat in the corner of their little garage. So obviously nobody told them that Piquet had been blocked from competing until they'd flown a car out for him for the event.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just an absolutely crazy story, and obviously just it's obviously a bit of a bummer seeing Carl in there just having to show off the fact that we just can't do it. We've been at the 11th hour. We've been told we can't do this now, which is just kind of a bummer more than anything else because. I would have liked to have seen Nelson take part, and I do think cameos overall are kind of cool. I think it adds a couple of extra eyes on an event that may not normally be there, and I feel like that would be, quite a neat little thing to have. So
I think the spirit of the rules argument is a very dangerous one to go down as well, because it's totally subjective. I mean, it's things like the McLaren F duct was against the spirit of the rules, but it was allowed. So the double diffuser was against the spirit of the rules, but it was allowed, and it won Brawn and Jensen Button a world championship. If you go down the road of saying that this is against the spirit of the rules, well, that's not sufficient. If it's the spirit of the rules, put it in writing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm inclined to agree with that. I mean, I think Johnson will relate to this example. Do you remember the blood feud in Robot Wars between Razor and Tornado towards the end of its run?
Oh my god, yes, I know exactly what you're about to say as well.
Yeah, and how Tornado was a robot that was very vulnerable to Razor's enormous pincer beak, and they put an enormous frame around the robot so that Razor's beak couldn't penetrate it. And of course, it resulted in
down the pit either.
Yeah, exactly. It was impossible to pit, essentially, and as well, it also included the facet of Razor adapting their beak to be able to turn it into a hook. So it got a little bit ridiculous between those, and that was a classic example of spirit of the rules there, where it was allowed, but Tornado kind of looked like dicks for doing it in the first place, essentially. So. Yeah, it's those kind of situations which I think can get very dangerous sometimes. So yeah, I feel like the spirit of the rules argument, I completely agree with Lewis. I think you can't just make that up as you go along, really. And if you want to do those kind of things, have an age limit, or have a experience limit, or have a if you've got a super license you can't compete kind of limit. If you're F1 eligible, for example, you can't take part. Something along those lines, so it's in writing, clear as crystal about what that situation could be. At least that's how I feel about it anyway. King, have you got a take on this real quick before we move on?
I don't know. I would like to see drivers, who might not normally compete in F3 compete, like Nelson Piquet, but obviously you don't want them overrunning the championship. And I don't know, I think I mentioned it like a couple episodes ago, like back in the 60s and 70s in Formula 2, they used to have a grading system where F1 drivers could compete, but they couldn't score points. Maybe something like that would be nice.
Sure. That could work, yeah. Just exclude them from the overall run-in in a sense of, point scoring. You still score from the runners that were eligible for the championship as opposed to these guests where they don't impede the championship, so to speak. I think that could work. I'd be for something like that. But yeah, shame that Nelson won't be taking part. I've actually been quite keen to see how he would have gotten on in that European Formula if he would have not taken out half the field, quite frankly. But